Everyone is admitted. You're good to go.
Okay. Greetings, everyone. It is our pleasure to host Dr. Farah Jasmine Griffin. And I am Georgette Mayo, and I'm at the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture. And to give a shout out to them for sponsoring the books of Read Until You Understand, which will be our discussion book for this evening. And the writer, again, is Dr. Farah Jasmine Griffin, who is published widely on issues of race and gender, feminism, jazz, and cultural politics. She has written or co-written 8 works of criticism and nonfiction, including Harlem Nocturne, Women Artists and Progressive Politics During World War I in 2013, If You Can't Be Free, Be a Mystery, In Search of Billie Holiday, 2001, and how I first met and was introduced to Dr. Griffin back when I was an undergraduate at USC, her book, Who Set You Flowing, the African-American migration narrative, published in 1995. She served as the inaugural chair of Columbia University's Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies, which she helped found. And she has been awarded the John Simon Guggenheim Award of 2021 for general nonfiction. So again, greetings, Dr. Griffin. I want to start off, before you say anything, I want to start off and say, this is a book for our times, to read until you understand. Many of us hopefully took time to reflect during the pandemic, what life means to you personally, and how to move forward. Again, hopefully with grace, as you have mentioned in your book. And possessing compassion for those around us, or as you state the term, ethic of care in the first chapter. I want to ask you, how did you arrive at writing this book? Part memoir, interweaving it with African-American literature and life and culture.
Thank you so much for having me, first of all, and I want to thank Avery for sponsoring this. It's a very special place. I've been there and been inspired by just being there. So it's a great question. I think that I had a number of different inspirations. One, the part of the book that's memoir was a part that I wanted to tell because I realized that I studied African-American literature as a graduate student, started studying it in college, but that I fell in love with it long before I ever knew about studying it academically. I fell in love with it because of my father. I fell in love with Black history, Black culture, Black literature because of my father. And so I wanted to say that the Academy doesn't have, a monopoly on studying and loving this work. And in fact, the Academy isn't even the first place that most of us encounter it. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book and the reason why I wanted it to be personal. And then the other reason was it started to come together for me during the 2016 presidential election. And I thought, this country is losing its mind. And it could do well to learn from these writers, these Black writers who have written so brilliantly about this place and its promise as well as its problems. And so those two things came together and the result was this book.
So how we're going to proceed is I'm going to allow you to talk, and then we'll have our participants that will ask questions. If you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand, or if you're shy, you can put your questions in the chat box and we will read them.
Okay, thank you. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation with you all. So I do hope that people will raise questions along the way. When I was organizing the book, the book sort of has two ancestor figures who are very important and one elder figure. The two ancestor figures who are very important in this book are Toni Morrison and my father. My father, because, he was my first teacher, and Morrison, because, long before I ever met her, I was reading her, and I think that reading her changed my life. The book is dedicated to her. And they're the two sort of steady figures that just take us through the whole book. And I say an elder figure because my mother is also an elder figure in the book. But all of the writers, the past writers, are sort of ancestors giving us a kind of ancestral wisdom. And then there are contemporary young writers and speakers and poets who I see as kind of standing in that tradition, who are also part of the book as well. I think we have a hand up already. So should I?
You had mentioned, is that okay, Georgia?
That's fine, Ms. Rambo. Go ahead.
Thank you. You had mentioned how if the greater society had paid attention to these Black writers, and somewhere in the book, I think you talk about the fact that if Americans had really listened to Frederick Douglass's "To Be a Slave," the July 4th speech, what it means to be a slave on July 4th, that they would have been converted and convinced, but they couldn't hear, they couldn't read, and they didn't read until they understood.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I think that, that there's a great deal of wisdom, and certainly Douglass is one of the figures who shares it. Delaney. I start off with Phyllis Wheatley. I mean, I think it's important for people to understand that from the beginning of the founding of this republic, even before the beginning, before the United States came into existence, that there were Black writers who were making sure that they bore witness to Black people and Black people's concerns, and making sure that they were kind of trying to shape and influence the ideals. And when they were ignored, they would then try to say, you aren't living up to your very own ideals, right? That you're falling short of your ideals. And I think that at every step of the way, large numbers of Americans have fallen short of the ideals that they profess to care about. And there's something like Black writers have been, like Douglass, prophetic in that not foretelling the future, but in speaking the truth to power and to saying, these are the ways you have not lived up to the ideals of the nation. And at any given moment, had those who were in power or the majority of our fellow citizens been persuaded, we might have avoided some of the horrible pitfalls like the Civil War that we found ourselves involved in. And so each chapter sort of gives us that section, that perspective. But I realized when I was writing the book that it was really, these writers were concerned, they were concerned with America, they were concerned with democracy, but they were concerned about things much more profound, much longer lasting. They were concerned with ideas and values that existed long before America came into being, the United States of America came into being, and that will exist long after. And that's why instead of having, chapters that are about American history per se, they're ultimately about things like mercy, justice, love, grace, those kinds of sort of trans-historical values.
I love how you interweave history along with the literature, and it's like an interplay. It's like jazz. It's like they're playing back and forth with each other.
Right. I mean, I think for me, I long realized that it was impossible to separate the two of them. They're two different things. History, the discipline of history, the study of history is one thing, and literature, right, the creative writing is another, but that they are connected to each other. and that history informs literature, and literature informs our understanding of history. And sometimes we write literature as a means of telling history, of understanding history. And so the two were very inseparable for me. And the historical moment, not so much history as a discipline or field, but the historical moment that a work is produced in certainly helps shape and influence that work in the same way that that work influences its time and lives through its time and reaches out to us. So you're absolutely right that those two things are intertwined. The personal, the historical, the literary are all intertwined. I can't think of them separately.
Do you find that your students relate more so to the literature versus like if they're opposed to, you know, learning what they think probably is history is just like a bunch of dates to memorize?
Right.
Do they gravitate more towards the literature aspect
Yeah.
to learn history?
Yeah. So I think they think of it, they come to it because of the literature, because everybody loves stories, you know? So they come to it for the stories. And God, we have a tradition of amazing storytellers. And what they realize is that they learn, what many of them come away saying is, oh, I learned history through literature. Like literature was the gateway and I learned history. And those of you who are here, or, you know, anyone who teaches African-American literature or even African-American music, we realize we can't teach it because so many of our students don't know the history. So that in order to teach it, we have to teach the history, right? You have to know something about Reconstruction. Because, you know, in order to talk about Charles Chestnut, you have to know Emmett Till, right? In order to talk about Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, where she has the men responding to what happened to Emmett Till. So my students, you're right, they come for the stories. And they leave loving the literature, but they realize they've learned history through literature. Literature has opened up a door to history for them.
I'm absolutely fascinated and was in love with your father. And I cannot tell you, I actually grieved. I wanted you to be here and to say to me that he's still here and he's still teaching you. There are so many elements about his presence in this book because he's everywhere in the book. The book wouldn't be here, I think, if he wasn't here. If he had not been here, we wouldn't have the book, and we wouldn't have you in the persona of you are definitely the intellectual issue of your dad, and he was just so amazing and underscores so strongly how profound teaching from parents as opposed to has on a child. That your love of reading, your understanding of history, your embrace of the world around you and interpretation of it, and his political leanings and his changes, his transitions, just he wasn't, you were a very fortunate woman, and he was fortunate to have a child who was smart enough to hear what he said and who read until she understood.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think you're so right. There would be no book without my father. And I think I wanted to highlight him for a number of reasons. One, you know, I just wanted to honor his legacy. But it was also important to me to say, you know, you don't know who the person is next to you, the people who you dismiss. You have no idea who those people are. The man you might see waiting for the bus at 6 o'clock in the morning, or the man with a lunchbox, or the man with a hoodie. Like, you have no idea, because my father in many ways was an ordinary working class Black man. Many of us had fathers like him who cared about his family, who loved his children. And in many ways, he was also extraordinary because he was quite brilliant and talented and self-taught. But he wasn't the only one. And so I just wanted to put his example out there, not to say that he's, different, but to say he's an example of what exists. And Black fathers who love their children, some Black men who happen to love to read and like our music and our history. He wasn't at every march, but he cared about those issues very deeply. And so I hope that people in reading this will see someone they knew in him, or maybe some young father will see himself. So yes, you are absolutely right. His presence is throughout the whole book. There would be no book without his legacy.
Kind of staying on the same subject of your father, if you don't mind, I would love to just read a small snippet of chapter 3, Black Freedom and the Ideal of America, because this part just really resonated with me. You'll see why in just a moment. So you said, by word and example, my father taught me that protest and resistance were both personal and collective. We march, we stand up, or sit down for what we believe, and we read. And then you went on to say, on the title page of Black Struggle, A History of the Negro in America by Brian Folks, he wrote, Jazzy, read this book. You may not understand it at first, but read it and understand. Daddy, baby, read it until you understand. Ask your teacher if you don't understand. She will like you for it. If you just know this book by the time I get home, I will be happy, Daddy. Thank you so much for sharing that very personal aspect of your life with us in this book. Can you talk more about, what it meant to you to have your daughter or have your father write that to you and the books that he shared and just have that?
Oh, thank you so much for reading that and for bringing that up. I think it meant different things to me at different times. So I thought, when I was a little girl and it was like, okay, Daddy wants me to read this book. And, he's always telling me to understand. Like he would always say, if you learn this, like he'd bribe me. Because like, for instance, I'm a shoe freak. I love shoes. I've always loved shoes my entire life. Like as a toddler, I love shoes. So he would say, if you read this and remember this, I'll buy you those shoes that mommy says you can't have. So that's what I thought of it as first, right? Okay, he wants me to understand this. He wants me to tell him what it means. He'll be really proud of me if I do it. I'll do it, and then I'll show off and show him how much I've learned. And then later, especially, and I cherish those things that my father gave me and those times we had like that. But then later, especially after he passed away, it became a mission. Right? It was like, this was my life. This is what he left me. These are the instructions that he left me with. This is what he wants me to do. And I've got to do it. And I've got to understand it, and I have to study it, and everything I can find, I have to do. Right. So that was, what I thought. And then his handwriting, this is all I have left of him, kind of. Right. And then as I got older, I thought, wow, to read until you understand is a lifetime, right? It's not a destination. It's a way of living in the world. It's not like, okay, now I get it. I know everything. I'm the smartest person. Everything about Black people I know because it's all in this book. But instead, it's to commit yourself to a lifetime of learning. And that's what he did. By example, he was always reading, always learning, always trying to understand. And so your question is, the reason why I find it such a rich question is because, the answer was always and continues to be unfolding. Like from the little girl who thought, maybe I'll get a doll or a pair of shoes if I read this. To, the grown woman who's still trying to read and understand. Great question.
Thank you.
We have a comment in the chat from Deborah Wright. She is saying, she wrote, what an honor to have you here, Dr. Griffin. This work is a powerful memoir, a profound analysis, a potent unpacking chronicle of Black life, Black American life. You speak of it as a meditation. Please tell us why you see it as a meditation. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Yes. So I think, because I think that it is many things, but one of the things is it's an invitation to sit with some of the things that I talk about, right? To just sit with it and experience it as you read it, to stop. I don't expect anyone to read it all the way through. If you do, that's fine. But if you find that you have to put it down and come back, it tries to, there's an arc, right? And there's an arc that doesn't deny the difficulty, the brutality, the pain. It says, sit with it, sit with death so that we can experience it, feel it, be saddened by it, and understand it as part of this story that I'm telling. And then it moves on. So I think that's what I mean by meditation. Isn't so much a academic lesson, but taking your time to absorb and respond to what has been read. And the arc of it is this arc from mercy to grace that includes the difficult subjects of death and injustice. But I try to, give us this, and death sits at the center. And then we get joy and beauty and grace on the other side of it. So it's like a deep breath. And finally, you can exhale at the end of a meditation. That's what I think I meant when I called it that.
Getting back to your father,
Mm-hmm.
I personally applaud you for elaborating about your father's death, how he died, and I just have to say that it hit personally, it hit close to home. So I want to thank you for being, full disclosure.
Oh, wow. It was one of those, I thank you for sharing that. And I knew when I wrote it, it's a truth that I have lived with. My mother and I have lived with together for a long time. I've written around it, but I'd not written it. But I knew that I wanted to tell that story about what happened because I knew that we weren't the only ones. I knew that. And I knew that that there are those kind of well-known, spectacular sort of, things that happen that are horrible when there is a police shooting or something like that. Then there's the kind of quiet, unnoted things that happen to so many of us, to use that phrase that's been used differently, the silent majority, so many of us. And I just wanted to say, yeah, us too. This happened to us too. And we were treated unfairly. We were treated horribly. And our community knew it. Our community knew it. And so they embraced us. But yes, I knew we weren't the only ones who had that experience. So if this was the time to tell that story.
Can I add to that comment?
By all means.
This is
Yes.
Barbara Blackwell. And okay, when your father died and you were in the back of the paddy wagon, as we used to call them.
Right.
Yeah, it brought back memories. I'm from Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And you lived in South Philly.
Yes.
Why didn't they take you to a closer hospital? There was Jefferson, Hanneman.
Graduate. Right.
Yeah. They were only 10 minutes from where you were.
Yeah.
And they took you to General Hospital.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know the way you felt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. They took us to Philadelphia General Hospital. I had assumed that they probably, maybe that's where they took the Black people, you know?
And that's what they assumed we had nothing.
Right. So that's where they took us. And you're right. St. Agnes was right,
Yes.
very close. So
Yeah.
that's what happened, and it's funny. I didn't think it wasn't until I got older and I started reading about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was like, oh, we were traumatized, like what happened to us was traumatic. Like that wasn't
Yes.
the language that people used because it just happened to poor Black people all the time, But
Yeah.
that was traumatizing what happened to us. That was traumatic. That's why when things happen today, 40 years later, my mother and I will call each other and cry like it happened yesterday. Because I think that, and this is what I also wanted to show, is that so much that we just absorb and just take for granted that happens to Black people, we don't use the language of trauma. And yet we relive it over and over and over again. Every time it happens, we relive it again. And right, that happened all the time. Those kinds of things happen all the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And trauma now is just used differently.
Yes.
Because Philadelphia is going through, I don't know what they're going through in Philadelphia. I mean,
Right.
it's, hey, I don't know. They used to call it, oh gosh, I can't even think of the term. But anyway, it's more than an OK Corral type of thing now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It has not weathered COVID well, unfortunately.
No, it has not.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, we have another question. Lady Sasha, would you like to unmute your mic, please?
Ladies,
Yes.
hi. How are you? I'm so glad to see you.
I know. I'm so happy to have been invited. Thank you so much, Mrs. Mayo, for giving me my book. I just received it. I just received it 2 days ago, so I have not gotten far, but I've come to many of your talks since the release of this book, and I would love to hear you share a little bit more, since especially in this space, I guess so many folks have remarked on a lot of the personal narratives and that intimate storytelling that you've really laid out so beautifully in this book. I'm wondering if you'd be open to share a little bit more about the writing process, especially with that dynamic structure you're mentioning, always making sure the text meets the literary, the historical, the personal. What was it like for you to or how did you approach getting this body of work out, especially over a few years, like since 2016? I just began it. I'm in page 100. I haven't gotten far, but definitely since you've been working on it for some time, I'd love to know a little bit more about your process.
Well, I think I conjured you up because I just saw your name somewhere and I thought, oh, Lady Sasha, I haven't talked to her in a while, so we need to catch up. Anyway, this is an excuse for us to get together soon. So the writing process, it was actually, it ended up being a very organic process. It was both the most difficult book I've written, but also the easiest book in some ways. It was the one that was most genuine to my true voice as a writer. I didn't allow my academically trained voice to come in and take over. I would push it back and say, no, my writerly voice is first and foremost here. So this is what happened though. When I first started writing the book, I didn't know what it was about. I actually thought I was going to write a book about Toni Morrison's fiction. That's what I thought. And then I was going for a walk. There's a Riverside Park in New York was central to this book. So I was going for a walk. And while I was in the park, it was the voice came and was like, this is not a book about Toni. Toni is important. She's central, but this is not a book about Toni. So then I'm like, okay, well then what is it about? And I thought about the things that I was trying to learn from her and I wrote those down. And then I knew that I had been trying to tell this other story, which was a personal story, but I wasn't sure how to tell it. And then I decided it's not an autobiography because I'm not pretending to tell everything. It's a memoir, that part. because I'm only telling one section, and I'm telling, my father, his death, the immediate aftermath. That's what I'm telling. And I think that little bit of the personal story relates. I can understand much of it through what I've read. And reading basically taught me that we weren't alone, right? That we were part of a tradition, that we were part of a people. And so then I started going back and forth about what were the texts that I wanted to talk about that would be in conversation with the personal story. And the personal story was only worth telling to the extent that it illuminated the values I wanted to talk about. So I was doing that over the course of the period, the craziest, period, presidential, everything, like, oh my God, this is crazy. And then we went on lockdown, then the pandemic, and everything stopped. And all my travel, all my speaking engagements, all of that stuff stopped. And the city shut down. And I spent my time still during the pandemic between Philadelphia and New York, because my mother is in Philly and I live in New York. So I still was going back and forth, but I suddenly had time to write and to hear myself think and to complete the book. And because the pandemic happened and then George Floyd happened, I had an ending to almost every chapter, because what I was seeing was all the stuff I'd been writing about, both in my personal life and through the literature and the history. It was all coming to fruition, like clear, it was there. And so every chapter, instead of closing or ending, it sort of opens up in a way in that moment. And so that was the kind of natural arc. It felt very organic. And I say the park was so important is because the final passages of the book, again, came to me on a walk in the park. So when people tell me they're stuck, they have writer's block, I go take a walk in the park because those final lines also came to me then. But that was the process. It was a very organic process, and things had to come out. And some things were very hard, like the chapter on rage and resistance was very hard for me to write, because as I was finishing it, people were filling the street post George Floyd. The chapter on death was hard to write because death is always hard, So those were the last two, actually, that I had to grapple with. But that was basically the process.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
In fact, I was just going to mention to me, that was the most powerful chapter, was chapter 5, The Rage and Resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And you read to understand, you read to learn. So I was aware of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, but I didn't know to that extent.
Yeah.
Her life, that she had her hands in basically everything.
Everything, right? Everything. I mean, what happened with that chapter is like, I was reading so much because there's so much rage and there's so much resistance, And so I thought, because I thought it was going to be a very contemporary chapter in terms of the literature, but then especially, this is where Philadelphia came in again, is that Philadelphia was one of the active spots for the Black Lives Matter movement, and they were confronting the police. And I decided, okay, let's step back. Like, these young people who are in the street are part of a lineage, and that Philadelphia, has this long history of struggle. And Frances Harper is one of my heroines. And so I thought, let's go back a century and see what those folk were doing. And what I loved about them was, they passed a fugitive slave law. So the Quakers, who are very radical white people, and the Black people there, they have, they're like, not on our watch. And that's what I thought was so important. They said they can pass the fugitive slave law, but you are not going to take another soul back on our watch. Like, some might slip through the cracks, but you're going to have a fight. Right. And that's what they did. They kind of stepped in. And I thought, the young people in the streets are the descendants of those people. And Frances Harper, I wanted her there because, you know, she was depressed. You know, she was depressed. She couldn't go back home as a free Black person to Baltimore. She was watching people being brutalized in slavery and free people being kidnapped and stolen back. And she was like, I could just keep doing what I'm doing, which is a relatively comfortable life, or I could try to make a difference. And I'm going to try to make a difference. She had a vocation and she stepped into it. And like you said, she had her hands, she was everywhere, you know, and slavery's over. Okay, well, then I got to move to the next, you know, the next radical movement I have to do. And so I love her. I walk by her house and like, it's like a pilgrimage.
I'm definitely gonna have to read a little bit more about her. Deborah, you want to go ahead? And
Yeah,
speak? And then Miss Rambo. I see Miss Rambo's hand up.
in the chapter, the quest for justice, I mean, you seem to, I love the way you broke down the plantation system. So, I mean, it was done so well. I really did like that. And the idea of justice, the restorative versus the transformative, that really hit me too. And these are just some comments I want to make, but I would love to hear anything you'd have to say. The other thing is in the death chapter, when I got to that and I was reading the intros, and when I got to the one that Gwendolyn Brooks, We Die Soon. I mean, I remember that. I'm old school. I remember that poem. Right. And immediately when I read that and I started reciting in my head the actual poem, and it did bring me to the thought of a more contemporary hip hop artist, Nas, and that PC that he does, Life's a Bitch. And, you know, so that kind of reminded me of that. But I would just like for you to talk about the plantation system breakdown a little bit in the quest for justice. I found that really interesting and just well done.
Yeah, I mean, I think that quest for justice chapter for me was, you know, I actually taught a course on Black writers and the conception of justice. And partly it was, we don't, you know, we are constantly in pursuit of it, and yet we so rarely get it. And yet we continue to pursue it. And so that's why I thought it's an important value for us. It has always been one, but I think we raise important questions about it. One, we raise the question, what would justice really be for, what would it look like? What would justice be for all the millions of people in slavery that we lost, you know, or slavery itself? What would justice for slavery look like? What is, you know, what does it mean for us? And then we still are always hopeful that we will get it, but we also almost expect not to get it. And yet, you know, we insist upon it. And I think that we continue to fight for it because we believe that the very fight for it is transformative. We are transformed as people as we fight for it. And as we try to make it a more just society, if not for ourselves, then for our progeny, then for the future. And then I got really interested in the notions of reformative justice and transformative justice. Like, suppose what we have to offer is something beyond the punitive, right? But that's something that actually restores, or even better, transforms the people who have been the victims of injustice, and has the potential to transform the society that has allowed them to over and over and continually be the victims of injustice. And so that's the kind of driving question of that chapter. And, you know, the transformative is like, in addition to, like, restorative justice would be a step beyond where we are, and transformative justice would be even more so, because it's not restoring things to the way they were. it's transforming them for the better.
Hey, Ms. Rambo.
I've been shaking my head. You don't know this, but I've been shaking my head, yes, through your entire description and during Deborah's comments as well. I wanted to go back to the going for the walk that helped you change your structure and your approach to the book, and share that I saw an interview with Toni Morrison once, and she said that on occasion, after she had written something, that the character would come to her and say, "Now, Toni, you know I wouldn't have done that." And so she had to edit it out. So I thought you would appreciate that little reminder. But the other that I want to comment on is how frequently you give us the intergenerational look at each of those topics, that we get David Walker, then we get Frederick Douglass, then we get James Baldwin on the same topic. And what is clear is that most of our great thinkers and writers were pretty much on the same page. There were, of course, areas of difference, but it was clear that the vision was, and I like the idea with the L in parentheses, the concept and the ideal of freedom runs through all of it. And when you talk about the music, I was also thinking how strong the concept and the ideal of freedom runs in the slave songs and the slave narratives. I mean, it is central. So from the moment we put our bare feet, African feet on this land, freedom was what we were looking for and are still looking.
It's the major concept. You're right. It's the major, that first chapter ends where, it's this consideration of mercy. And then it ends and it says, maybe instead, I think the writers, they're interested in mercy, but they're like, rather than looking for mercy from white people, which we're probably not going to get, what we need is freedom. And freedom, you're right. And it's in the music. It's in not just the lyrics of the music, but the music itself is where we are free, where we are free.
Oh, that's a wonderful comment. I like that idea. Yes, it is.
Yeah. And one of my favorite, one of the things that I learned when I was studying Black music in particular was some of the people who, particularly during Reconstruction or right at the end of the Civil War, even people who had gone down to the Sea Islands to transcribe the music, the singing of Black people, they couldn't transcribe it on the Western scale. And later critics, Black critics would say, that's because the music was free. It refused to be captured by transcription. It refused it. Those notes that those Black people were singing refused to be captured by the Western scale of notation. So the place where we could be free was in the music.
Whitney Phipps does a piece on the fact that the diatonic scale is all the Black keys.
Yes.
Which I think symbolically says not only the pain, right. As you said, it is not only the words, it is the actual music. If there were no lyrics, you would hear the quest.
Right. You would hear, I think, even more in the music, because, in Souls of Black Folk, W.B. Du Bois talks about the notes that his grandmother sang, and he didn't understand the words because she sang in a language that he assumed was some West African language, but he understood the meaning and the sound. Mm-hmm. That's where the communication was. It was in the sound. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, before writing, before we had quote unquote what is considered to be writing.
Right.
We've always been oral.
Yeah.
If I can come in again,
Go ahead, Deborah. Thank you.
So also, one of my favorite chapters was Cultivating Beauty. And I, first of all, the fact that you had some images, some art in there, or, is really great. that was a wonderful surprise. But the description and the honor paid to the seamstresses, and my grandmother was a seamstress, and everything that I wore, she made. But you refer to the seamstress as like an artist, a conjurer. So that was kind of interesting. I love that. Just sort of making something out of nothing. I love that so much. If you can speak to that just a little bit.
Absolutely. I was looking at the ways that the aesthetic dimensions of our lives, ordinary lives, just ordinary everyday folk, tend to the aesthetic dimension of our lives, that aesthetics aren't things that belong to elites and museums, right? And that our culture attends to the aesthetic dimension all the time. That's why we care so much about style, being creative, doing it a little bit differently, putting something beautiful into it. And Zora Neale Hurston writes about this, where she writes about characteristics of Negro expression, setting things at an angle, just doing it a little different. And so like you, I come from grandmother seamstress, mother seamstress, aunt seamstress, that these were women who took a great deal of pride in what they created. And yes, it was a craft and a skill, but they were ultimately concerned with the beauty of it. Like the beauty, it wasn't only utilitarian. So they didn't just make you something to keep you warm. It had to be pretty. It had to be a little fly, in addition to keeping you warm. And a recognition of each one's style was a little bit different. And so that chapter and the final chapter, I really wanted to talk about the kind of aesthetic dimension of the everyday lives of, and the beauty, the creation of beauty that a people who have been treated in such an ugly way have given so much beauty through style, through language, through music, through the homes that they created. All of those things were, I think at one point I say my mother's home was her canvas, right? And I know that's true. That's true of, across generations. It's a kind of multi-generational passing down of a kind of an aesthetic appreciation. So that's what I was trying to get at there.
I'd like to open it up to our other members who have not spoken yet. Any comments? If you'd like to articulate them verbally or put them in the chat, please feel free, because we're winding down on time and I don't want to keep Dr. Griffin. We have, the honor of having her here. I don't want to take up too much more of her time. So
Enjoying it. So please, if there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to respond.
Georgette, can I jump in?
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Farah. Hi, Georgette. Hi, Zora. Farah, Zora, and Niani grew up together.
That's what she told me.
But I haven't seen Zora in years and years, so it's nice to see the grown-up Zora. So Georgette and I were young mothers together. And I have to confess, I have not read the book, though I bought it for Niani. I'll read it this summer, right? But I'm just curious about your mom and how she's woven into the story. If you could say something about that, because I've met her a couple of times, but I don't know her. I haven't had the chance to have long conversations with her or anything.
Well, first of all, I should say Diane is the first person who took me to Avery. So do you remember that trip we made? Yeah,
I remember.
Little girl, right?
Yeah.
So my mother is woven throughout this story too. And, she is a young widow and, we are made, you would understand this even closer by the, experiencing the death of my father and her husband. There's the chapter on love, the transformative potential of love is their love story. And then it opens out into a broader sense of what love is. And, so she's throughout the whole book, but I think her wisdom is there too. And so I tell a story about in the Cultivating Beauty is all about her, because, it's about her as a seamstress. It's about the house that, the home that she created. It's also about her, dealing with a little girl, a teenage girl who comes home and says, Mrs. Saunders, a school teacher, says I'm not cute, and my mother giving me this lesson about why Mrs. Saunders said that. And then about, but and you are cute. You're not, she says, you're not cute. Babies and monkeys are cute. You're beautiful. And then she says, and it means nothing. She's like, the way you look doesn't tell me anything about who you are. And so I think you get a sense of who my mother is there. And the book actually ends on my mother. So she is, my father is sort of like the, driving factor, but my mother is the constant all the way throughout and the source of lessons and all those good things.
Well, thank you. That makes me want to read it even more.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to see you, Diane. And you've got a book coming out too, H is for Harlem. Can't wait. Looking forward to it.
Yes, thank you for joining us, Dr. Johnson. It was always good to see you. And I see that our executive director of Avery Research Center, I'm going to put her on the spot. If you'd like to say a couple of words, Dr. Butler, are you there?
I'm here. I just needed to unmute. Sorry. I'm working with 3 screens right now. So I did want to say that it's been a pleasure listening in on this conversation. Sorry, I had to get myself together. There we go. It's been a pleasure listening in, and I'm honored. I'm grateful. I'm excited to hear that you visited Avery and hope that we will have you return. I too am guilty of not completing the book. I did receive it, then I disappeared, and then I returned. And so I just want to say thank you for this opportunity, for speaking with this group and sharing insight. And it makes me even more excited to read the collection, and everything inside of it. So I'm just very excited and grateful for this opportunity. So
thank you so much for hosting me, for distributing the book. When I got the invitation from Ms. Mayo, I was just like thrilled and excited and said, yes, let's make this happen. And so I'm just really happy to have had the chance, and don't apologize for having not read it. We're all so busy. It's not going anywhere. And luckily, I think each chapter kind of, it reads well as a book, but each chapter can be read as a standalone. So read it when you can, when you are able to. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just as a heads up, Dr. Griffin is the actual reader on the audiobook.
I am, yes. They approached me, they sent me an actor who was a very good actor to read it. And I thought, I want to read my own book. And so they agreed to let me read it. And then my husband says that I became insufferable because, I found a new career, and I come home. The only thing he liked about it is I come home and I would say, I can't talk. I have to save my voice. And I think he liked that I was quiet for a week. But other than that, it was so much fun, and I really enjoyed reading it.
I am not a fan of Audible. I don't do well with Audible, but now you have convinced me that I have to try it. I wanted to make another comment, and that was about the bibliography in the back, where you have you have listed all the songs, and those are the songs. I am a Stevie Wonder person, but those are the songs that really formed the philosophy and the insights into politics. Yep. I mean, when you think about what's going on, and signed, sealed, delivered, and they're just they're a host, and the Philly sound,
yes,
which does not get its due. That was an amazing number of songs that incited people to think about their condition. It wasn't just, not that I'm diminishing romance, but it wasn't just a love song. It was a song about loving yourself and loving your community. it was a broader love thing. But
So true.
I was very pleased with your teacher part that came in the back of the book, because those are really good things to look at and read. Once you've read your book, then to go back and read what you referenced for. So I so appreciate it. And thank you, Dr. Butler, for all of your support of the Consuelo Francis Reading Circle. And I should say to Dr. Griffin, I am absolutely sure that Consuelo Francis is smiling after she read this book. I know she's read it now and she loved it.
Thank you so much. And what you say about the music, I put that music chapter there because I had to say, I was like, look, if I'm being honest, I have to be honest. I'm trying to be truthful to my readers, that music was even more important than books. And music brought us all together. And this was the music of the era that I'm writing about, where those, Gil Scott-Heron, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Aretha, all of that. And you're right. That chapter shows that it gave us a sense of consciousness, and Earth, Wind, and Fire was emerging, and the Philly sound was there. And that if you listen to that music, it will tell you a lot about that period in history and about Black people's sense of who they were. It's all there in that music of that period.
Definitely. And on a side note, I have to bring up that when you wrote about meeting Patti LaBelle.
Yes. Yes. So for people who haven't gotten to that part of the book yet, I tell a story about, I said I was a shoe freak since I was a toddler. And the only time I ever played hooky from school, I had a cousin who was a bad influence. And we were on the bus, and she said, she went to school with me, and she said, about 4 blocks from school, she said, let's get off. And so we got off from school and we had nothing. We had bus tokens and maybe $1. And so I wanted to go to the shoe department of Bonwit and Teller just to look at shoes. So we went to the shoe department of Bonwit Teller, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning. There wasn't anybody in there except for Patti LaBelle, who's from Philly and lives in Philly, and her 2 or 3 people, maybe security guard or something. And so, because she loves shoes too. So I was like, Miss LaBelle, can I have your autograph? And she said, oh, of course, baby. She said, but let me ask you something. She said, why aren't you in school? And I thought, uh-oh, she probably knows my mother. I am in so much trouble. But that story is in that chapter, the Cultivating Beauty chapter. Yes.
Yes, thank you for elaborating on that. I love Patti LaBelle. I used to live in Voorhees, New Jersey, and work in Philadelphia.
Uh-huh.
And I would run into her several different times.
There you go.
She was just so personable. And
Yes.
I became a Patti LaBelle groupie. I used to go to all the concerts when she played locally. So yeah,
Yes.
I just had to get that in.
Yes. So you know how like open and warm and wonderful she is when you run into her. Yeah.
Yes,
right.
what you see is what you see on TV or video is, yeah, she's very personable and very down to earth. So
Right. So thank you for letting me share that story.
well, thank you for writing about it. And thank you again for joining us. This has been obviously it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for taking the time out of your schedule to join us tonight. I appreciate it.
Yes, I want to thank everybody for joining us. And next month, I have to put our next month's, if I'm not mistaken, I think it is April the 17th. Correct me, Zora or Miss Rambo, just to make sure. But we are celebrating our namesake, Dr. Consuela Francis. I'm sorry, go ahead, Miss Rambo.
I was just helping you with the name, Dr. Consuelo Francis, who was a lover of literature extraordinaire and a promoter.
It's going to be on the 21st.
Okay, her birthday, thank you. Her birthday is on April the 3rd, so we are celebrating her birthday. And she loved Octavia Butler. So we are reading Parable of the Sower. And everybody will be getting an email in regards to that and some other news, upcoming books for the following, the upcoming months. And something for the readers to take part in also, to participate in. So we look forward to you joining us. And for everybody that's new, thank you so much for joining us. And for our devoted members, thank you for also for joining us. This is always a pleasure getting together with our readers and definitely when we have guest authors, but join us next month in celebration for Dr. Conseula Francis. Until next month, we'll see you. Take care.
Bye.